For your eyes only, darling.
Melina Havelock is one of the best defined characters in all of James Bonddom. Her quest for revenge is what drives this movie. The ATAC might be the MacGuffin, but Melina avenging her parents is the thing that keeps you invested. Bond girls aren't usually this driven. In fact, their role in the story is frequently to facilitate plot. Consider Domino from Thunderball, a character who is in the dark to the plot for most of the story, is told that her lover has murdered her brother, and then immediately gets captured and held prisoner for most of the rest of the film until she avenges her brother at the very end. On the surface, Domino and Melina Havelock have very similar revenge arcs. The difference is that Domino needs to be given her quest for revenge, whereas Melina is on her quest for revenge for the entire film. This is the difference between a passive and active character. In fact, Melina's story exists almost completely independently of the rest of the spy shenanigans of the plot. She and James are allies because their goals align, not because they share the same goal. It's very effective characterization. The part is very well cast, too. Carole Bouquet is a French actress and model who hasn't really had very much Anglo-American crossover, but she's an incredibly big deal in France. She was the face of Chanel No. 5 in the 90s. She's been on the jury for Cannes. People like to talk about the Bond girl curse, but the reality is most of these actresses who didn't have mainstream success after their one movie are really big deals in whatever countries they came from. Aha is only a one-hit wonder outside of Oslo. Regardless, Carole Bouquet is made for this part. She has this smoldering intensity to her that she can really dig into without looking angry. There's just this raw wound in her eyes when she needs it, and there are these little moments in the film where she's looking right into the lens and being really serious and vengeful that would be really melodramatic when coupled with a different performance, but that melodrama matches her intensity really well. On top of that, the rest of the movie orients itself around revenge as a theme. Back to the Blofeld scene at the top of the show. This scene isn't just about killing Blofeld, it's about recontextualizing killing Blofeld as James Bond completing his quest for revenge. It's not just a reference to Blofeld generally, it's a reference to On Her Majesty's Secret Service specifically. Literally, the third shot of the movie, if we're counting the gun barrel, is Teresa Bond's grave, James's murdered wife from Majesty's. It's the kind of shot that functions as a thesis statement. Killing Blofeld at the beginning of this movie isn't just symbolic of the changing direction of the franchise, it's Bond finally serving justice. James Bond in the more serious movies gets better when it finds something to be about. And with this choice, it refocuses the movie on not just having revenge as a theme, but being about revenge.
The Chinese have a saying, before setting out on revenge, you first dig 2 graves.
He's speaking from experience. Melina is new to this. She's clearly comfortable with the killing she's doing, but honestly, she's going down a kinda dark path. Maybe it's a bit hypocritical of James given the opening scene. Maybe it's a bit hypocritical of James considering the way he dispensed of Locke. My interpretation is that he sees himself in her. That's the reason they have a mutual understanding and a type of sexual chemistry. She is a cold-blooded killer in the making, and Bond is familiar with the path this victim of circumstance is now headed down. I fully acknowledge that I'm probably reading too deep, but the fact that this movie supports a reading this complex at all is impressive and indicative of the fact that these movies are starting to get more self-reflexive. So, here's a question. Why did this happen? What changed? If the main female lead of this franchise suddenly got way more complex and interesting, what forces conspired to make that happen? I am at this point indebted to Fernando Gabriel Pagani Burns at the Universidad de Buenos Aires and his essay Sisterhood as Resistance and For Your Eyes Only in Octopussy. His big idea is that the radical feminism of the 1970s changed our perspective on women in the workplace and popular culture. The question stopped being, can women be in the workplace, and started becoming, now that women are in the workplace, what happens next? What are the consequences of that? what does that look like? And what it looks like is 9-to-5 working girl and network. This stands as a contrast to the sexploitation and jiggle TV of the 1970s, which was interested in depicting women doing traditionally masculine things with titillation as a more core goal and one foot out of reality. The way this manifests in James Bond, according to Burns, is by comparing For Your Eyes Only and the other movies of the 1980s to Agent XXX in The Spy Who Loved Me. The film centers on the idea that Bond has met his match with his new counterpart, and yet Amasova is always presented as being 2 steps behind Bond, and her positioning in the narrative draws into question the progressive nature of her characterization. Burns notes that Melina Havelock is never captured by the villain, saves James Bond's life twice, and never puts the spy plot in jeopardy by making a mistake. She is the equal to James Bond that Agent XXX was advertised as. I disagree with Burns in regards to James and Melina's sex scene, though. He makes a good point about how the final sex scene is prescribed, and then follows it up with this language. In spite of this final encounter, Havelock can be considered a strong character. I don't know, that just seems a bit prudish to me. I agree with Burns' points otherwise. I do think that the final sex scene comes a little bit out of nowhere. But I'm fine with that. It's reasonable to me that 2 consenting adults would come out on the other side of a series of intense experiences and close collaboration and decide to hook up. I don't need an extra layer of justification besides that. Still, the criticism is warranted. I suppose if I was playing script doctor, I don't think the solution would be to cut the sex scene necessarily. It just needs better contextualization. I think what Burns wants Melina's character arc conclusion to be is the arc conclusion of Camille Montes from Quantum of Solace 30 years later. Another Bond girl out for revenge who gets it, feels terrible, and then exits the story without ever getting in bed with James. It's an important choice in a new era of self-reflection for the franchise. Whatever your reading of it is, this is a moment that defines Bond's limits. What isn't he willing to do? What will he stop himself from doing? And on a metatextual level, what are the creative decision makers going to allow or not allow to happen in the story? That's what this movie is doing with its filmmaking sensibility. We aren't going to space. We aren't going to have a supervillain. We blew up the spy car. But it's also what the movie is doing with James Bond as a character. It's holding him up to the light and seeing if there's a new perspective to look at him with. Maybe not as extremely as some other movies in the future would, but that is what it's doing. This is a movie with a lot of interesting moral ambiguities. Is Melina justified? Who is really the villain of the movie? How much do we want to make fun of the Thatchers? Can James Bond keep it in his pants for 10 minutes? And the answer to that last question is one of the best scenes in the movie. The Camille Montes moment of For Your Eyes Only is the scene when Bibi Dahl, the figure skater, tries to get James to have sex with her. This is a scene where James Bond rejects a woman's sexual advances because she's too young for him. Hooray! Our main hero isn't a psychopath! This scene reveals a limitation of this character. He does have a backbone. He won't accept sex just because it has come to him on a silver platter, and he will say no to someone who isn't old enough for him. These are new things about James Bond that we learn in this movie. We also learn some things about the filmmakers in this scene. Bibi Dahl's age is a little difficult to determine. The actress would have been 22 at the time. James Bond thinks she's too young. That means she's too young. And now the filmmakers are walking on eggshells. There's a certain bravery that comes with wanting to include this scene in the movie because the balancing act is struck between making the scene less gazy and suggestive than it could otherwise be, and making it very clear that Bibi is coming on to him very strongly, the way that a 20-year-old would to another 20-year-old. Then, later, just to make sure you got the point, he seduces an older woman using more gentlemanly tactics in a much more sexually suggestive scene. The characterization goes deeper than that. James Bond isn't used to women trying to seduce him, especially being this youthfully forward, and it interrupts his script. The situation is really awkward and uncomfortable, and he doesn't respond in the most tactful way ever. In fact, he's really infantilizing and condescending, and clearly wishes this wasn't happening right now.
Yes, well, you get your clothes on. I'll buy you an ice cream.
There is no music under this scene. There is a love motif in this movie, but it ain't playing right now. The scene parallels a similar scene in From Russia with Love. A knockout blonde has broken into James Bond's hotel room and attempted to seduce him by lying naked in bed under the sheets, creating a situation where the nature of consent is shaky. Certain shots side by side reveal the influence, and, of course, the interaction in From Russia with Love was being surreptitiously filmed, voyeuristically. There aren't any cameras in this scene, though, except there are cameras. We are watching the tape. All of these elements come together to create a very uncomfortable scene, putting the audience into James Bond's subjective headspace for an incredibly long 90 seconds. And we've also discovered another limit. Bond doesn't really know how to say no. That's interesting. For Your Eyes Only is a movie that gets overlooked, and I understand why. It doesn't have a good title or a plot worth speaking to or a gimmick or anything in its product life cycle that makes it noteworthy. It's also one of my favorite movies. I like it when James Bond takes big swings, and it's fascinating to me that this movie took a big swing by taking a much smaller swing than they had in years past. They came off of James Bond in Space and regrounded the franchise for the next 7 years in a new action sensibility and intelligent character development. It's the last good Roger Moore Bond.